to the
This
internet.
is how it works. So the first couple secs are me going onto the stream on my iPad and checking that it's actually working.
Okay. Okay.
That's how it works. Let's have a look. Are we on? Are we live?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we are.
Are we on? Are we on YouTube as well?
Oh no. Yeah, we if we're on this, we're on the tube as well.
Oh, really? I didn't need to do
tube.
that on YouTube.
The tube.
Yeah, we do both. It links across. We're technological wizards.
Wow.
So, welcome to today's fantastical roundtable Journeyman Questers chat. I usually start this by saying, boil up a pot, take a seat by the hearth and enjoy a fine brew with the Journeyman Questers. You can't hear the music, James, but we're jamming.
Oh, I can't hear the music.
Yeah.
God's sake, Josh.
Oh wait, now I can.
Today we're going to be. We don't have Theo. However, I'm sure he's there in the chat. Look at he is. Good evening, lads. Good evening to you, Mr. Theo. Theo usually hosts these. However, he's unable today. But we have some fantastic people joining me to discuss a little bit more of a DM style roundtable today, a game master, dungeon master style. And joining me is none other than the man himself. We talked about him every week. It is Mr. James Gifford. Mr. James Gifford!
It's me.
It's you. Oh, let's put some different
Thank you for having me.
It's
round of applause.
My one and only
for the man.
sponsor.
it's our patron. No, we're your patron.
Wait.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You're
I
like
think so.
you're like our D&D daddy as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
I'm okay with that.
well, James, I will get to you in explaining who you are and what you do and everything. But we're also obviously joined today by Josh, who plays Ruthless in our Gypsies of Fortune campaign. Theo says a fairy godmother. Yeah, I think it's more like that, isn't it? Fairy god daddy.
God daddy, I'll take that.
An interesting fact about, I think it's nice that it's the three of us that happen to be doing this specific roundtable chat, is that we all started playing Dungeons and Dragons, at least for me and Josh, with James. The first time we ever played Dungeons and Dragons was actually in a very old campaign that James ran before. So hence James is my DM daddy. And since then I've taken the mantle out of his cold dead grasp and I have absconded through the woods and created my own civilization, stealing some friends along the way and
Man, you don't even know like what you've done to us. You got us into this, and it's just been a wild adventure ever since then.
You essentially are responsible for this and all of our excursions in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe I would have done it anyway. I had sort of dabbled in it as a kid before, but never to the extent or properly. And I would also say that I found my my feet or my like rhythm in being a DM from watching you DM originally. And
yeah,
thus the mantle was passed down. So today that's just a cool thing. Josh obviously played in that campaign as well when we were all at uni. Today I thought, Theo's saying an unhealthy addiction. I don't think so.
No, it's a healthy addiction.
He knows it.
I think it's the most wholesome thing that we do.
It is very wholesome, isn't it? So today we're gonna explore the realm of being a DM, being a games master or a dungeon master, and kind of explore, I think, into the realm of creation, imagination, and homebrew, and kind of essentially coming up with your own stuff. I'm going to go less into like mechanics and things like that, and focus predominantly on those bits. But before we do, James, your background's gone. If that was
I was looking into Roll20, but I don't know. I guess I won't do that.
You won't be able to hear the fantastical music in the background if you don't. But
that's all right.
it might be because Roll20's wanting to take your video or something.
Oh yeah. I'll switch that off.
Josh, why don't you introduce yourself and who you are and what you do?
Hello, my name is Joshua, and I am but a humble player of the Dungeons and Dragons. I have DM'd once. I attempted it. I attempted a one-shot, and it was actually a Witcher-themed D&D session, trying to combine those two loves. And it was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever attempted. It was scary. It was really scary. So I have a lot of respect for everyone that does the DMing out there. All of you special people. The amount of effort that goes into it. But yeah, I'm just a player at the moment. I play Rufus Suncrest in the campaign that we're playing, who's a stern nobleman fighter who loves to play by the rules and smite evildoers. And I'm just here along for the ride. Hopefully I can give you guys the player's perspective in this kind of conversation.
Thanks, Josh. I'm just moving everyone round so that we're in the right spots of the stream, because James undid his video and then redid his video. And now the whole thing's out of whack, James.
Classic. James.
Sorry.
God damn it.
Right. Why can't
I mean,
there we go.
Why did we invite you?
DM 101 is to throw those curveballs, keep you on your toes.
Thanks, though, Josh, for that.
That's
and, of course, Mr. James Gifford. Would you like to... Who are you? Why are you even here? You're not in this... You're not in our game, are you? Or are you?
Maybe. So I'm James Gifford, also known as Mr. James Gifford, because someone else took James Gifford on Instagram, and I hate them for it. So I've been playing D&D for, about 15 years, or kind of tabletop role-playing games for 15 years, now. I kind of started out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and one called Gauntlet. I don't know if many people really know about that. But really kind of old school, the kind of games where wizards start with 2 hit points and a stick and 1 spell, and that spell better be damage dealing. I kind of first started out as a player, kind of learning it through some other old friends of mine. But then when I met you guys, I started our group with my first campaign using Pathfinder. And I think it was a learning experience, but it's great fun. I think one thing you learn about kind of when you're starting out as a DM is that you can't really make any mistakes so long as everyone's having fun, and it's good to kind of learn as you go along. But I sometimes play as a player in your game. Well, I played once or twice as Valentine, the Changeling Bard. At the moment now I'm doing I have a Patreon of Mr. James Gifford where I post homebrew items that I post twice a week. I'm working on a book of herbalisms and flora and fungi you can use in your game to kind of add a herbalism mechanic. I have 2 current groups on the go, one of which Tashi's in, Ghosts of Saltmarsh.
Welcome.
My days.
Welcome.
So many
indeed.
fingers and so many pies.
I know.
So many things going on. And I'm Tashi. I am the DM here, James.
There could be only one.
And I'm the DM for the Journeyman Questers and in our current campaign. And I've already said who I am in previous things, so we don't need to go into that today. Why don't I hit us with the sort of first topic, which we've just, spoiler alert, we just fucking beat Germany in football and everyone's screaming outside on the street and driving past. Hence why we started a little bit late, but at least it didn't go to extra time. Anyway, now that I've got my ladness out the way, let's get into the real deal. World building, world creation. If you're a new DM looking to kind of take up that mantle, often a module would be a really good place to start, as it offers that kind of world that already exists, or at least a story with mechanics, with kind of stuff pre-written that you can kind of latch onto. But I think I'm of the opinion, and maybe it's kind of how me and you used to run games, or do still run games, James, is actually diving straight into it, even if you're a new DM or a very experienced DM, and just creating your own stuff, and not feeling necessarily the restraint of having to stick to this module that maybe some people already know, or kind of like know some of the restraints of. If you're creating your own world, your own campaign, I think let's start off with the world. How like that's quite daunting, it seems. How does one even begin?
I think part of kind of creating a world as a DM, you're kind of playing the role of the illusionist, where you're kind of giving the illusion that there is this kind of grand world to explore, but also without kind of spending huge amounts of time kind of filling out, the kings and queens and political goings-ons. What I tend to do when I'm starting an adventure or campaign is have just a very short kind of speech or introductory kind of passage where I kind of describe the state of the world that they're in at the moment on a kind of large scale, whether it's, I don't know, a war going on, or plague, or some kind of political thing happening. And then I kind of narrow it down. It's almost kind of saying, well, that's just kind of dark clouds on the horizon. Where you are right now is in this small town doing these various things. So you give this kind of sense of a huge grand story happening in the world at large, or just setting like the world, and then establishing kind of where the players are locally and what kind of level 1 adventure they're getting involved in. You don't have to fill in all those details. You can just hint that there is this mysterious wizards university far off in the neighboring kingdom, or that there's a strange uprising of werewolves in the country next door. You don't have to plan it out unless the players are taken there.
Yeah. So maybe having some little choice specks of ideas dotted around, but really not having to worry too much about fleshing every single thing out.
Yeah.
Something that we all have in common is being illustrators. We all went and did illustration as a degree together. We all are, I would say, artists and creative types. We're the classic trope of a millennial art school people. However, I would argue that has allowed us to create. And although, Josh, you've only DM'd that small Witcher session, there's a huge amount of creation that you do for my campaign. I actually tend to almost let the players, well, I do let the players create their own sections of the world from, for example, where they're from. Zook, who's the druid in the campaign, he, in his backstory, created all this stuff to do with the forest, and I took that and put it in the world, and I kind of ended up basing the world around what the players had built. And part of that, and I think a part that James, you definitely like to do, and Josh has done for me, he's done multiple for me in the current campaign, is draw maps. I think a map is a great way to start. I've got some counter arguments for it, which I might throw at you in a bit. But Josh, creating a map, you've done that for me. Do you want to elaborate maybe a bit on how we came about doing that, even though you're not a DM, but you contributed?
Yeah, definitely. I really like that aspect that all of the players have the opportunity to do that as well. I think it's so engaging for us as players, that knowing that we have that little bit of control in a way of the world that we're playing in. It just like brings that like engagement, especially when it comes to your own character's backstory and stuff. But yeah, it just came about because we were following along the plot line of the quest and the story, and it was coming up to the point where we might go into this area that my character is from. So Tashi was like, do you want to... Tashi had already created a huge map, like a world map. And in the past, a while back, we'd sort of said like, oh, this is probably where your character's from, this area here. And then when it came to it, he was like, now that we're going there, do you want to flesh it out a bit and make a little map, or like think of some areas and stuff like that? So that's what I did. That's pretty much the answer to that question, I guess.
Yeah, you did. You fleshed out not only the province map of the kind of region, this area, which is like a large province. I'd say it's like probably about the same size as a county in the UK, like Sussex or Devon or whatever. It's like about that size. And then you also drew a really cool town map for the capital of the province, Solreach, which we massively used and really influenced me and the game that I was creating. I didn't even have to create most of the names of the locations in the town. Josh had done that for me. Part of his backstory, he had the Sun Keep, which kind of sat with a moat / estuary that kind of cut around it on the map. There was the Grand Loom. Josh came up with all this stuff to do with how the province was a predominantly a flax crop province that grew a lot of flax for linen and clothes, and therefore in the city there's a lot of industry, a lot of big looms and dye works and various kind of like clothing related industry, and that all got represented on the map with various kind of bits. You even named a few different shops and like the baths, all of that stuff. And as a DM, that's really cool. I didn't have to create any of it. They go places all the time. I've got enough stuff to come up with. And I guess thanks to the map, that was a really good way in. James,
is that something? Sorry,
I mean, kind of continuing that point, I would say like, what I find is sometimes it's useful for a DM not to kind of totally fall in love with their creation because they get too protective of it. And like, if you're going to allow players to kind of contribute their side of their story and their creativity, you have to have a certain element of kind of free reign of them creating what is in this world, I think. Like, you can't, at least if you want them to kind of do a story that they want to do and create their own background and their own maps, then I think you have to kind of not be a little bit hands off with that and not be too kind of like, oh, you can't do that
there's a fair amount of trust that maybe you have to build up with your players.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Do you think that's from DM perspectives? Like, do you think that's something that it should always be that way? Like, the world should always be a collaboration between you and the players? You know, to a certain extent, not like it's 50-50. But yeah.
Oh, good question.
I would say for me, it's kind of 50-50 when I'm doing my games, at least, because when it comes to then like being about town and doing kind of more kind of downtime moments and role play moments, like I'll say, okay, you know, there's a bunch of shops. What kind of shops are there, maybe? And they'll say, a bakery or whatever. And we kind of collectively build this town, and I'll maybe describe a character, and someone else will have a great idea, and I'll kind of retcon it and change the description of the character or their behavior. When it comes to the overarching story and adventure that I've kind of planned out for them, things like dungeons, kind of courtroom intrigue, like that, I think for the sake of setting a challenge for the players, usually means that there has to be some kind of consistency, because if it's constantly changing, and I think if it's kind of up for grabs and whatever's happening, the more free reign you have with the rules, the less kind of challenge there is, because you're kind of essentially creating obstacles and creating environments that are new to them or unknown to them that they need to overcome. So it's a bit of both, I think. Like sometimes you have to say, no, I'm going to say like this is how the world is. Deal with it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because there's definitely as the DM, I imagine you're the captain of the ship, and you still need to steer it on course. And if there ends up being lots of inconsistencies, then it just starts to get a bit weird.
It's more in cases where if I'm trying to pose a challenge to them, so say they go to a town that is under siege, there'll be certain kind of difficulties in that town that, you know, they won't be able to go in and out easily. There'll be shop restrictions, and it gives them a situation, an environment that they have to think outside the box. And that's one piece of fun that can be found in D&D, is that you have to overcome these challenges. Of course, there'll be towns where, you know, they can make up like whatever's there, and, you know, we kind of collectively create what the kind of town is like. But I think it's a bit of both sometimes.
So we've chatted about kind of letting players do some of the work for you in your world building. But I think maybe when you're first starting out and you're thinking of a new campaign or a new world at least, and you're creating that initially, I know that you've drawn a world map, James, or at least the sections of your world. I don't know if you want to maybe just talk about your world and how you came up with it, and Giffordia in general.
So,
because I think that the maps have really established, you know, that I think that quite heavily influences the game.
Yeah. So, I mean, my kind of standard homebrew world and campaign that I've made, I named Giffordia after myself because I thought, why not? I made it. Very, very simple concept. I think at the time I was watching Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I was like, okay, there'll be 4 nations. Each of them will be named after a different season. So there's the Summer Kingdom, the Winter Empire, the Spring Islands, and they each have a different kind of flavor to them. And usually, I kind of tried to keep it as kind of open box as I could, so that if I wanted to do a more kind of gothic or spooky campaign, I would set it in the Winter Empire, where everything's kind of dark and a little bit more kind of Grimm's fairy tale. If I wanted to do a pirate campaign, like we're currently doing, it's set in the Spring Isles, where it's full of kind of rogue islands. So when I first started out making that, I didn't really have a basis of what these different places were like. I just kind of hinted, oh, the Winter Empire is a bad place. Like, no one wants to go there. It's a terrible, like, ruled by despot kings and so on. And then over time, the more I played adventures, and the more different groups would explore, because each of the groups I have will be in the same setting. I would kind of slowly add to the lore of this homebrew world that I've created, which kind of kills two birds with one stone. You have an existing bunch of notes for somewhere you've already created, and then the more you play in it with different groups, the more you kind of add to the history and to kind of refining locations that you just kind of hinted at before.
I think that's a really interesting thing. Like, I can imagine like trying to create a world. It's like if I was going to be a DM, and I was like, I feel like I would feel like I had to create like so much at the beginning, just in case like someone asked me a question like, but what's over there? And I'd be like, I haven't planned that yet. But like so much, it's such a long-term commitment. I think a lot of campaigns, or I imagine a lot of campaigns are like really long-term things for the most part. So, and yeah, I think a lot of it just happens over time. Like it's an organism that like grows and grows.
Yeah. And I think like, I mean, I obviously don't tell players this, this is kind of like the DM secret, but there are times when I'll have, for instance, the maps that I've drawn, for example, or the locations I have planned, I'll say like, oh yeah, there's this whole kind of thing going on there. And later down the road, if it suits the story, I think it is okay to retcon things and say, actually, I know I said this was a town full of ravenous cannonballs, but actually it's just a hobbit village. Maybe they did have cannibals there, who knows? But I think it's okay to change things as you go along, especially when it comes to setting and lore and places people haven't visited yet. So that gives you a little bit more freedom.
Yeah, because you as the DM, the players don't know anything until you've introduced it to them. So you can say whatever you feel like, really. There's always the safety net of like, it's your story and you can change stuff.
Yeah.
There's a fear of I think it's kind of what you were touching on, Josh, which is a fear of being asked questions and having to come up with stuff that you don't know yet, and then saying the wrong thing or what you deem to be the wrong thing as the DM or GM. Where what's over on that island? That's on the map. I can see there's an island there that you've drawn, but obviously you've just drawn a little squiggle, and you're like, oh, it's an island that has a big volcano and it's just full of lava, and then you realize later, fuck, that doesn't make sense, or I don't want that in the lore, and you go back. There's ways of kind of doing that in game as well. You could, if it was a history check that they rolled, it could just be that they get there and it's not, and it's like, well, sometimes the histories are wrong, or you're not from this area, you're from the Summer Kingdom, and what you know about the Winter Empire is probably really old-fashioned or skewed by the view of the kingdoms. So you can.
It could be people just don't know, because you find if it is something that players are adamant to kind of pursue, then obviously potentially between sessions kind of plan something. But you're right, like history isn't always kind of concrete. There's always word of mouth and things that kind of get misunderstood, or rumors that aren't true. Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where like someone's asked you something and you just don't know what to say?
Yeah, all the time.
Like if someone's like, oh, but like I thought that island was full of dogs. Like you said that last time, and then you're like,
oh, like they've caught you out on something. That you said.
Yeah.
Maybe, or just in general, like. Is there been a time where you just don't know? And then like, how do you deal with that afterwards? Is there like a good way of just like being really vague and glossing over it and moving on? Or can you just say like, look, I haven't planned that bit yet. Let's just move on.
I think depending on the group, it's okay to open the question up to the group and be like, I don't really have an answer to this. Like, what do you guys think? Like, what would explain this kind of conundrum we have? And like, usually I think it was like in our recent game in Saltmarsh, everyone was heading to this lagoon where all these turtles live, and it's like the homeland of one of the players. And they arrive and they find it's under siege by a group of pirates, and they get on there, and there is I kind of planned for a little bit of downtime for them to get to know the village and like the location. But we had a weird session where everyone was kind of feeling like, I don't know why we're kind of here to really, small talk with the locals when there's this dire situation of them being under siege. And I didn't really have an answer for it, because mechanically I was like, I want them to kind of scout the area, kind of. But I think eventually I kind of pushed forward the events a little bit to kind of make it feel more desperate, because it was a desperate situation they were in. Sometimes I think you just have to either open the question up to the group, or just kind of come clean and be like, oh yeah, well done, you caught me.
Yeah,
it's okay to do that.
DMs
There's
make
no
mistakes
pressure.
too. I'm sure there must be occasions you can think of, Josh, where I've said something and then someone's been like, wait, didn't you say that this was that? And I've been like, did I? I don't remember. Sometimes I don't remember things. I
feel like I remember thinking that, but I can't remember.
Yeah, they're
specific
often
situation.
I think if
it's so small.
Yeah, if you as if you're DMing and you're quite like nervous about that kind of situation, playing it off, it honestly doesn't matter. Players are constantly forgetting stuff, and you're the one who always has to remember everything, and you can't remember everything all the time, and they're gonna put you on the spot, and ask you stuff, and you're gonna have to come up with it on the seat of your pants, whatever the phrase is. You're just gonna have to create some shit on the fly. And that, and if you make it up and then you forget to write it down, and you don't remember what you said, I mean, luckily we record it, so I go back and I watch bits, and I'm like, what did I say? What did I say then? And if you don't have that luxury, I mean, it can be very, very difficult. But I don't think it matters. If you're a new DM and you're listening, or even if you're an experienced DM and this sort of thing troubles you, just don't worry about it too much, and just open it up, like you said, James, to the rest of your players. Be like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to retcon this. I'm going to actually change my mind. You know what? I've just remembered. I've done it a few times with certain things where I've been like, before the session starts, I've said, hey, this is something that exists in the world currently. I'm changing it. Now the law is different. They're often only minute things. Often there were name changes. So I put a bunch of things in the game that had names that were names from other stuff. I'd like heard them and I'd just been like, that's a cool name, I'll steal that. I've read that book, or that's a really cool name for a town, even though my town is nothing like that town, or the name of my keep is nothing like the keep there. It's still a name I've taken from something, and I just went back and I was like, I've changed it. It's now called this. And I put a little sticky note on the back of my on the front of my DM screen, so all the players could see it, to remind them, don't say this word, say this word for that instead. I changed some main NPCs' names entirely, but shifted them slightly, because I was like, we can't use that. It's too similar, and that's my bad, or I changed parts of the law, or you can do something on the fly that,
it's usually like improvised stuff. I find
it is.
is I have to retcon at the next session, but I try not to do that if that's like a last resort, to be like, I'm going to own up. I know I said this, but let's change it. Like that. I try not to do that too much, but no worries if it happens.
Oh, thank you.
We can, I think, talked about kind of world building, making maps, and using your players to create stuff for you. But if you're creating stuff, I think a map is a cool way of starting out and fleshing things out, even if you don't show it to your players, even if it's just for you. What I was going to throw out there is the counter argument to maps in my head, which I sometimes do. I'm of two minds. I love creating a map. I love a good map. I love when someone else hands me a map. I love when I'm a player and I get a look at a map. It's really cool. But I think there are a couple of negatives that could go alongside that. One being that I think once you've made the map, there's almost a slight element of mystery that's lost. If you create, let's say, a little town in the middle of a wood, and you dump your players in there, and you don't tell them much about the outside world. They're from this small region. You build a little region. You don't really do anything else. And then all of a sudden you hand your players a world map or a map of the larger continent, and you're like, oh, you're here. That suddenly it's like the kind of sense of what's beyond and where are we and what is this place suddenly becomes this one image and this map that you can see. What do you think? What do you think about that?
I get what you're saying. I don't know if I entirely agree in that. I think if anything, when you're given a map, logistically, it's useful just to know where you are in relation to, say, the big city and your town, for example. But I think having a map, what I sometimes do is I'll add symbols, or I'll add a tower or a strange marking in the top left corner, or a strange pyramid or something. And those will be cases where points of interest that the players will be like, oh, like, what is that? This mysterious woods in the middle of nowhere. And it adds, I would say it kind of creates mystery, because they see these different places or these different strange parts of the map. Maybe there's a part of the map that's burnt out or like damaged and they don't know what's there. I think you can create a sense of a world around you whilst also kind of creating more questions and kind of feeling like there is a world to explore beyond, one that is full of mystery.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I've never thought that a map is a hindrance to like curiosity. It only like increases it. You know, unless you've like literally created a entire world map and given it to the players and it has every single detail filled in, which is just never going to happen anyway. Like that would take probably your entire life to do.
Yeah. I think like if you have at least say 5 key locations and then everything else is kind of details, I guess it goes back a little bit to like preparation and how much a DM should prepare for their games. With a map and having all these kind of mysterious elements to it, you don't have to flesh it out. You can just kind of create little seeds of interest for them to follow. And
then like in ours now, like you've got that big map and that's not even a world map, it's just a continent. But then when you get to those areas, then you hand it to players, like with what we did with my own character and Rupert's character. You then let them fill in that area.
Yeah, I think without a map at the beginning, I would argue there is more sense of mystery, because you have no idea where you even are or what there is beyond. And then perhaps there could be something said to withholding the map for the first I don't know, 6 or 7 sessions even. While they're doing the small time stuff, and then eventually they get a map. They get a map of the town, but not straight away. They get to imagine the town in their head before they see it on paper. Because I think as soon as you give them the map, that's what they see in their head. That's the image that they see. They don't see the town as they imagined it would be. They're like, oh, the tavern is there, everything has its place, the old burnt out tree atop the hill is by the creek. I imagined that in my head, and now that I'm seeing it, it's I don't know, it's very definitive.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is true. Like that is cool as well to delay that information a little bit to your players.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
It's less prep time for the DM to create a map with this whole town in it, because there might be changes, there might be things that happen on the fly in the game, buildings that pop up or whatever.
Yeah, big time. And I think if you're a new DM and you're creating this world, creating a world map with continents and stuff like that, I think is very unnecessary to begin with, because your players aren't going to be traveling over continents yet until they unlock magic. I mean, even then, it's up to you whether you even allow that kind of thing to be able to happen. But coming up with some, a tiny little scribble of a town map just for you, coming up with some scribbles of maps, maybe of the continent or the country, with the various sections of the kingdoms, maybe where forests or mountains are. Very basic stuff. Even if it's just for you, and if it's not, still keeping it fairly simple so that there is, like if you're playing Skyrim for the first time, there's only a few icons on the map. The map exists. You can see the mountains and the forests and the rivers, but the icons and the things don't pop up until you go there. I think you flesh out the map maybe as you go. Just come up with a really cool idea I might even use in my next campaign. Creating a physical world map that is your area, maybe where you are, has some things fleshed out. The rest is still kind of sketched, not quite complete. Maybe there's the outline of the country with a border, maybe some mountains. And you hand that to your players and they fill it in as they go. Something like that. Maybe
it's just half a map. Maybe part of the quest could be to find the other pieces of this map. That's what's nice about maps. It indicates there is a wider world to explore, but especially old maps, it's a new world and people didn't know kind of what was beyond the hills, and that you can use to your advantage, where you don't have to plan everything, but kind of make it seem like there's something there.
This map is maybe 500 years old, and the things on it have changed since. That nice city that is symbol that's on the tower or whatever it is in the fields over there. They go there and it's but a crumbled ruin of once, what was once a majestic city. There's so much. It is pretty broad. Let's. Well, sorry, Josh. Yeah, you finish us off, and then we'll move on. Wait.
No, you go. I was going to move it on as well.
I think we should move on to talking about homebrew. Homebrew is a good topic, an interesting topic. By homebrew, we mean creating things that don't pre-exist in D&D. In at least the core game and the core books and the kind of official Wizard of the Coast expansions. There's lots of pre-made homebrew material out there. There's a ton. There's more homebrew stuff than there is official stuff, because DMs are creating stuff constantly anyway. And equally, you can create your own stuff. Creating your own world technically is homebrew, weirdly. You're not running a module, you're homebrewing your own world. However, is it homebrew? What does homebrew really mean, James?
I would I think I would classify it as homebrew if there is already an official kind of setting, or official settings, like Forgotten Realms, like
Faerun.
Yeah, Faerun. I mean, I've never really used like kind of official settings, and even in my own D&D game, I still use the Pathfinder gods because that's kind of where I came from, and I kind of learned the whole pantheon from there before I moved on to 5th edition. And yeah, I think homebrew is just what you make of it. I think it's nice. That's kind of what's so special about kind of role-playing games and about 5e in particular, is that there is such a wealth of information and homebrew things people have made. You know, you can type in diseases 5e and there'll be a whole list of diseases that people have made up to add to your games. And I think, yeah, I think that's it. That's what homebrew is to me anyway.
How often do you find yourself like homebrewing things? Like how often do you're planning something and you're like, this just doesn't exist in the game as it stands, so I'm just going to create something?
I feel like James is an anomaly in this regard.
Am I?
Because
I homebrew a lot.
Yeah, and hence why we're talking homebrew. I homebrew a bit. I homebrew some stuff, but definitely not to the extent that I'd say you do, James. I mean, you've created like an entire deck of assorted magical items, and I think that didn't come about, you know, because you were like, I'm going to create a deck of magical items. You already had all this stuff that you'd created previously and all these ideas that were floating about, and you were doing it already.
Yeah. Like I had a list of, it kind of started with, you know, I was like, oh, I want, you know, I was looking for an interesting magic sword at one point, and I was like, all the magic swords are just like +1 magic sword, and
Basic.
It wasn't really very exciting.
Bitch swords.
Yeah, basic bitch swords. A flaming sword, and I was like, I wanted to.
It's probably the most interesting one.
Yeah.
Still pretty basic. Ruthless
works for me.
Yeah, and I think what's nice about homebrew is like you can tweak it rather than being a sunblade. Perhaps it's like a night blade. Perhaps it deals, I don't know, necrotic damage or something. It's corrupted. Perhaps it has a kind of name etched on the handle, which is kind of the key to a wider quest. Like you can really customize it to your story. And one of the things that I've found when I was doing my my deck of cards during the Kickstarter, I opened up options for people to get custom items, where I kind of draw custom items for their games. And I kind of, it was really interesting to do that, because a lot of the items people sent me were very interesting items, but they were so specific and so detailed. I felt like I had to really hear the story and adventures that they were in to really get what the item was. And that's what's nice about homebrew, is that it's so unique and specific to you and your group. Like, even not even just items, I think even things like monsters, you can homebrew or at least tweak zombies and all kinds of creatures so that they are new and refreshing for experienced players, for example, and keep them on their toes. Like homebrew goes above and beyond and is kind of limited only by your imagination, whereas the official rulebook is kind of a little bit rigid. And there are pros and cons to that. Yeah, I
feel like it would be impossible to run a session, like run a campaign and not homebrew something.
Yeah, I think as creatives, like it's for us, like we're like, yeah, that I couldn't imagine doing that. But I think there is comfort in having the rule book, and a lot of people do find it very much easier to be like, this is what this creature does, and it's kind of more reassuring to know what to expect.
Yeah, maybe for newer players or like new DMs. or if you don't feel as comfortable, like, creating something. And there is that safety net. It's so vast, the existing rules, that you could safely sit in it for a long time, couldn't you? But I can imagine there's an element of like trust that you have to build with your players and between the players and the DM before you really start to like adventure into the unknown, if you will, of homebrew.
I mean, I think it has its place. I think it is, I would argue, is necessary in creating a kind of like unique story. If you're creating this narrative with your players, it's going to be unique already. But you go to the desert and they need to face some kind of creature, like, let's say, what's some kind of sand? What's a classic sand creature? Maybe some mummies.
Sandworm.
Right? Some mummies. But they're actually way higher level at this point, and mummies would be a walk in the park. So you think, well, I could put lots of mummies in, but is that going to work? Or, I'll look up, is there a greater mummy? Does that exist? Or I don't just want to throw the same kind of mummy at them. It'd be nice if there was like a classic mummy, but then I throw, I don't know, the mummy has, and then you add some extra flavor to it. And even if it's just some simple changes, or one of the mummies has one of the abilities or spells taken from the mummy lord, you kind of go up one and you steal a bit and you make an in-between mummy, some demi mummy or something. That's homebrew. You haven't really done a huge amount, but you've made the experience for the players 100 times more kind of interesting, especially for those that maybe have fought mummies before. Even if they fought mummies previously in the same campaign, they come back, they face the same thing again, but it's not the same. You've changed it, and often it's a Google away from finding someone that's created some cool thing already, which I tend to do quite a lot. If I don't have time often to sit down and create a whole new monster with stats, and I don't want to make that up on the fly. I think homebrewing mechanics like magic items and monsters especially, you kind of do need to pre-think and write down the important things for those, because coming up with their AC or their health or what their damage does, or coming up with a monster on the fly, I would argue not a good idea at all, because how do the players gauge a good challenge from it? You're changing it continuously. Basically, you're then just in charge of whether they're surviving or dying, and there's no longer a. We could get into, should we fudge dice or should we not, or should we stick? Should we change health mid battle? I think if you're newer, you're going to tend to yes. If you're more experienced, I think probably tend to no, because you by this point you're managing the challenges properly, and you shouldn't do it. But we're not going to. You know what? We're not going to get into that. I shouldn't even give my opinion.
There's if you're homebrewing something, is it right to say that there are always like rules attached to that in one way or another?
I think rules for me kind of exist to challenge the players and to be fair, because I think, like, whereas you can have games where, and I've seen games where, been a part of games where everyone's just telling a story and anything goes really, you can choose to slice off someone's head or a monster's head and that kills them instantly, regardless of how many hit points they have. You can just tell a story and there aren't any rules attached, and that's fine. The issue with that is you're giving away consistency, and the rules kind of provide consistency where you can strategize and think logically and think, okay, that creature was very difficult to kill, so these other three creatures we should probably sneak past. Whereas like if you homebrew it, I think you still have to assume that when they find this unique, strange creature, these other unique, strange creatures that look a lot like this are probably going to be the same. Like that logic we have to assume is rational.
You
and
still
it's not
have
like,
to like,
yeah,
you still have to build it into the existing rule set of the game. Like whatever changes you make or whatever, it still has to like fit.
It has to. I think it has to function. It has to function.
Yeah,
like function is the word.
I think. Yeah, you could do this pure narrative-based role-play game, but I would say it's taking the game element out. There is no longer the game, and the game is the rules and the mechanics that make it unbiased. You know, they're the thing that makes it. They're the things out of our control. It's basically the dice rolls, and having a set kind of difficulty on things.
It's pure role playing, whereas the game or role playing game, like the game part is the rules and like the mechanics. And like both are fine on their own, separate, together. I think with when you're homebrewing a monster, I think you have to, unless it's a very unique monster. For example, say you have a monster that can attack you, but it doesn't attack your armor class. It just attacks you and deals damage. There has to be a reason, I think, or you have to be prepared to explain that to the players and say it's a swarm and it kind of goes between the armor, and no matter how quickly you dodge, it's kind of too massive to really avoid, or something, some reasoning for why this homebrew is unique and behaves differently to other homebrews.
Yeah, that leads really well into the point that I was also leading to, is like, if you're homebrewing something, what is the key to making that work? Like, what's the key to making it balanced and fit perfectly?
The key.
I think my advice would be start simple. Like homebrewing can be creating a monster entirely from scratch, or it can just be reskinning an existing monster. Like, you know, you could take a gelatinous cube or an ooze that can split itself and just make it a humanoid. It's some kind of strange creature that can duplicate itself, a cloning, creature. And just assume that it is humanoid and it doesn't have ooze traits, but it has the same, perhaps its touch is acidic or something. Like, you can reskin a lot of items, monsters, even spells to an extent. And just that will be homebrew, and that'll be new and fresh and interesting for existing players.
Yeah, I guess that's the easiest way, if you're literally just changing the look in your mind of something.
Yeah.
I guess it gets a little bit more difficult if you're changing the actual stats, because you could create something and change the stats, and then when you go to play it, it's like, oh shit, this is actually like so much more powerful than I thought it was going to be. End up killing your players because of it or something.
Definitely trial and error and experience. A good example of this, Josh, is I've obviously homebrewed those geists that aren't geists. I've called them inquisitors in our current game. That's an entirely homebrewed monster. I've created an actual stat block. I've got like the image thing for it. I've really fleshed that one out. Because I knew that it needed to be, it needed the justice of doing everything for it. Because if my players are going to go up against it and it's going to, it's going to be a challenge, I don't want to cheat them out of coming up with things on the fly. I want to be able to have it set in stone so that they feel like it's fair, and I can also give it my all with this. I have this flaming sphere in my hand, and now I'm going to throw it at the players. I'm not going to say it lights fire on the way. I'm not going to change it as it goes. I've got it. I'm running with it. They know that. They know I'm going to come at them, and they know that it's fair. And maybe that's part of it. If you're homebrewing stuff for the first time and you're adding things in, and you're like, fuck, I've made this way too powerful, way more powerful than it ever should be. I would then say definitely change some things. If you're a newer DM, and you're still finding your feet testing those kind of things out, I think, if you're going to TPK your players due to you making an error on making something that actually was a silly idea, maybe halving its health, or making it, or maybe it was injured already, so that fits in. That's quite a good one, because that's narrative, and then they know, oh wow, this thing could have been a lot worse, but it wasn't. It kind of cheats your players out of it a little bit, but if it's new and it's early, it doesn't matter so much. Not everyone is playing these like epic streamed games that are like really narrative and very cinematic continuously. D&D isn't always that. D&D is also kind of like, throwing dice and mechanics and adding things and maths. So I think it's all good to change some stuff. Creating homebrew, there's obviously loads of stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide about like creating all of that. Some of it really cool, some of it a bit mathsy with the XP and the CR rating and all those. I tend to just kind of.
I haven't read any of that.
We've been DMing. Oh, so for Josh, CR is the challenge rating of a creature. So I use that a lot for pre-existing ones, and when I'm homebrewing something, it's very difficult to know what the CR is. You can base it. I usually look at another monster and think, well, that's of that kind of caliber. That's something that's just, it's really hard to figure out, and I wouldn't get too fixated by that. I was going to ask Josh a question about homebrewing. As a player, homebrewing is still accessible to you in terms of your character, your class, and maybe even the things that you have when you first create a character, or maybe when you go into a subclass, or even later on as a spellcaster. There's still opportunities for you to kind of talk with the DM and be like, hey, I'm not sure about this spell, maybe, or I've come up with this new spell, or I've got a cool idea for some kind of subclass that actually doesn't quite fit into this, or can we reflavor or reskin some of those elements? Not only sort of your thoughts on it, but have there ever been any particular kind of almost homebrew elements that you've implemented into characters?
I've never gone like majorly, like nothing major.
Not big time, but it's never usually like I've created my whole class. That would be the extreme.
No, but there's obviously like small things, like it's your character, and if you're playing them for a long time, I think you should feel the right to have a say, of how they work and how they do things. On whatever level you desire, and it's a conversation you should have with your DM and be like, and just run it by them and make sure it works. But the only thing I can think of is, like, off the top of my head, is like my character went through a big change, and then because of that I was like, it'd be really cool if I then multi-classed into a different thing, but we changed it because it was such a specific event to the story that I basically went into Warlock, and Warlocks have to take a pact. So Tashi created a pact for me based on what had happened. So I've got like a pact with this huge tree, which is like the center of the druidic magic in the world. So I've
tree.
got this like connection. Yeah. And then because of that, I was a fighter, so I didn't have any spells or anything. So when I took that, I then got some spells. I got like some cantrips. So I chose some cantrips, and I was thinking like, oh, it'd be really cool if these were thematic to like what had happened. So I do remember I chose one. I chose Booming Blade, which is a really cool little spell. But I discussed it with you, and we changed it so that like when you hit the creature, like it's all like thorns and vines that like go through the person and explode out of them instead of just like generic magic.
We basically just created a it was
just a reskin,
similar to the Pact of the Fae, but we essentially changed that. So rather than it being this kind of like conniving natural magic, it's just raw classic natural magic. There's no like Fae pixie element to it. And so Josh, was it Druidcraft that you can have as a cantrip now, or did you ended up not choosing?
Yeah, Druidcraft was like I think I could choose, and I chose that one just because it felt thematic.
See, I don't think Druidcraft is one that you can choose. I think that was that. I'm trying to remember now. The Pact of like a Druidcraft isn't unlockable by a warlock as a cantrip.
Oh, okay, yeah. Then that must have been the case then, yeah.
Unless it is in the Fae one. I'm mixing up what I've homebrewed and what I haven't. Regardless, you know, Druid being a Druid class, you get Druidcraft. Whereas Josh picked it up, he's his character reincarnated on the tree, became a forest gnome, the same as Zook, who reincarnated him, who's the Archdruid of Air. So it all kind of tied in, and Josh was the one who was like, I want to, be cool if I took a level in Warlock, but that how would that make sense? Or we kind of discussed it, and that's a cool homebrew, and that came out not because we wanted to create this to begin with, but it came out of narrative. What makes sense in the story, what have we got, and how can we change that so it fits, so it's more narrative.
Yeah, I feel like we do that a lot just because our group is so like, it's so RP heavy, and we're so all about the story. So I feel like we love doing that kind of stuff. Like when something happens and to your character, you just want to run with the theme and like change your character accordingly.
One thing that I've found a lot, or I see a lot of people discussing, is when you're making homebrew, there's always a question of particularly things like abilities and items, like what homebrew items are overpowered, and where is that line for it being overpowered? And I don't know, like I guess that's a question for both of you, like, as well.
I've definitely got some opinions on power. I think in general, most homebrew stuff is way more powerful than the things that are in the book. The magic items that are in there aren't actually that powerful. Being able to access something that grants you loads of spells, extra spells, things that...
Well, even like additional, like your example of additional powers and additional subclasses to a character. I think it's you take it all with a pinch of salt. If you're going to give your players these items, if you're going to give them some really powerful magical items, or maybe you don't really realize that they're really powerful until you've given them to them, just make the encounters harder. You then encounters and how the experience is actually weighed up versus your player level doesn't take into account magic items ever in the maths of it. I use Kobold Fight Club a lot for like matching up stuff and seeing what level and how much XP and how much of their daily limit this is exceeding. And I always have to push it much further than I anticipate, because they've all got really
really good magical items that and they're prepared, and they've got potions, and and there's a lot of them. There's 6 most of the time. So it already pushes it further. You can balance it later. You can have that magic item stolen from them or taken back. And if it's really a problem, you just sit down with your players and say, hey, I'm actually going to change that homebrew slightly because I've realized that I said it was cast once every short rest, and I realized every short rest is actually crazy powerful. I did that. I homebrewed all these. I've talked to you, James, about it. You helped me with some of the curses. I came to you for the curses. I was like, I've thought of the cool stuff that they get. What about like the counter version of that? Just to let you in a little trade secret, Josh. James is the one who came up with being blind but getting blind sight.
Oh yeah.
That's
with,
entirely James with the Nightstone.
With Theo's.
Yeah.
With with Dylan's character.
Dylan is now completely blind. He has like this horrific visage where his eyes have like just gone black and all his veins have come out from his face, and he's horrible to even look at. He got a big minus to his charisma as well as part of it. And
should have known. James Gifford loves to fuck with your players and like mess them up in some way.
He's not as bad, honestly. He's not as bad in this current one. I created the Heartstone Halberd first, which was for my player Richter, Aiden's character, and the curse as part of that. I mean, the boons were great, and he can double his health, which is amazing. But it comes at a cost of essentially, in order for him to regain that ability, he has to become exhausted, and it depends on how long, like a long rest. He can recharge it over like a really long time and not get exhausted. He can recharge it over a short amount of time, a short rest, and get I think it's like a D4 exhaustion, or he can try and recharge the ability as an action, but it's D8 exhaustion, and that potentially he could die straight outright if he rolls a 6 or more. So like in the nick, he could, if he wants, just like, oh shit, everyone's gonna die, I need to do this, and then just expire. And doubling your health is like super powerful, but again, I balance that with the fact that it's not even once a day, it's not even once a week, it's once and any time he has to do this thing to recharge it. And the curse, that's not even the curse as part of it, it was disadvantage on death saving throws. So the Heartstone Halberd, it's all about blood and relating to blood and his health and his own vitality, and essentially he bleeds out quicker. He bleeds out like that. And I realized actually that's not quick death. That's just he will die, but over 3 rounds. You're very unlikely, to roll above a 10 with that. So I changed it. I said, by the way, I've changed it, and it's not disadvantage. It's just 1 death save. You just have 1 death save. Wow. And he was like, "What?" So it's just 1, and it's the draw, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
But equally, he has so many things to stop him going down with doubling his health, using life transference, things like that. If he does, he knows it's going to be tough because it's that 1 roll. Otherwise, he's done.
That sounds like that's the key, is like balance. Like it's all about balance.
Yeah. But I changed it after the fact, and I think that's fine to do, especially if it's homebrew.
I imagine that just comes with experience. When you know the game more, it's easier to balance things.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also kind of understanding like what is limiting items and abilities, and like usually it's the fact that it costs like an action or a bonus action, and you can only have 1 of those each round. It's why I think items, like say you have a magic wand that can cast like 20 different spells, like depending on those spells, it is kind of powerful, but in the end you can only really cast those spells 1 at a time. And I would say a wand that has, say, two spells, but you can cast them both at the same time, that would be more powerful because you're effectively giving your player kind of more action economy.
Action economy. It's all
action economy.
Action economy. Yeah.
Like you're giving them more things to do in one round. So those things you have to be careful about. I think as far as like knowing, like knowing the balance, for example, like damage, one thing I always do is look at like different spells and spell levels and seeing like how much damage does a fireball do at like level 3, level 4. A fireball is basically just an explosion. So if you're doing, say, like a barrel that explodes, I would use that as a reference, maybe reduce the radius. Like there's all these kind of things you can tweak: the number of dice, the radius, the duration,
the damage
all of
type.
which kind of, the damage type, all of it kind of controls how powerful something is and what its limiters are.
Yeah, and there's nothing, to answer your question again, Josh, there's nothing more serious, if something is really powerful, you can always write into the game that it's started to deteriorate. That magical item seems like now you're using its magical potential, and slowly over time it is beginning to fade. You can, it's up to you, as long as you don't feel like your players don't feel like they're being cheated out of it. You're the one who gave it to them to begin with, so they should be thankful. I've got a bunch of things from Theo in here. Theo's saying his character, his charisma is now 4, but thanks to the minuses.
You're welcome.
I think he's got big old minuses, and he also pointed out that one of the other bad things about the Heartstone halberd for Richter's characters, he can't be healed by magic. He can, but it's half. He only gets healed by magic half. However, certain spells, like life transference and like anything that gives him temporary hit points, things like that, that's obviously not halved. And magic, non-magical healing. So I would argue there are certain things that like you can be healed by that maybe aren't entirely magic, that could exist. Like, I mean,
never underestimate a good night's rest.
Exactly. Yeah, he's not.
Heals you right up.
Let's start to bring this to a close. With, I think, one of the cool things we can end this on, Josh can maybe speak for me instead, is some house rules. So they're often homebrew. They're often kind of creations that DMs and players alike have around the table. Is there anything, James, that you do that you can think of at this point that you always implement into your games, and it's now a staple at your table? Like, I run sessions. These are some house rule homebrew things that I've changed about the game, and I believe are changed for the better.
There's one which is more just like a mechanics thing, which is things like curses and diseases. Like a cure disease or lesser restoration won't necessarily get rid of disease. And I kind of treat it a little bit more like Dispel Magic, where depending on the power of the disease, if it's I have a kind of list of diseases in kind of level of power. There's like lesser common ailments and then plagues.
Those are diseases that you've also homebrewed?
Some of them I've homebrewed, other ones I've just kind of nicked off the internet, to be honest.
But you've compiled,
I've tweaked them,
this list.
But a lesser restoration will cure like common ailments and give an additional save or get the player to roll a save for more serious diseases, whereas I think that's right.
That's
no. Lesser restoration provides a save for common ailments, and I don't think it's like save at disadvantage for serious diseases. And then greater restoration cures common ailments and provides a save for serious ailments. So it gives this whole aspect of uncertainty, and there's kind of something very anticlimactic, especially stories based around disease and plagues that are going on in the town. If you can just cure it like that. Same with curses. Like, a curse should be something that you're like, oh no, like this is terrible. And even casting remove curse should really depend on how powerful the person casting that spell can essentially counter the curse that is on this ring or item rather. It could be a curse that, just makes you sneeze like every 10 minutes, or it could be a curse that, really cripples you in some way. I think another homebrew idea I had, it'll come back to me. Anyway, that's one thing. Curses and diseases.
I think that's a great one. That's something that I always mean to implement in my game, but I never really use diseases ever. I guess they're really high level to an extent now, and it feels kind of like a little bit maybe earlier campaign, lower level, to give them some diseases that kind of will hamper them, unless I really double down, and give them something terrible. Which I could.
I would.
Maybe I'll have to steal that list off you, James. How about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some
Josh
nasty
is
ones
like,
on
fuck off.
I was actually just thinking about when we played our campaign together in the very first session. Our other player contracted rabies from the very first encounter.
I remember.
The
and
first
it famed him for the rest of the campaign.
It's like a bunch of wild dogs bit you when you got rabies. Yeah.
And it was incurable. So he had rabies for the entire campaign. Yeah, that's just how it is. Josh, can you think of any that I do or we do in our campaign?
That I really like.
Or any. Or some that you don't like?
I feel like there's been some recent ones that I really like, some recent changes. I really like how we've changed saving throws to be more appropriate.
James
depending on depending on what the spell is or what the save is that you're going against, like using the saving throw that's more appropriate, really. Because I guess beforehand, so many of them, especially for spells, are all like wisdom based.
Yeah. Wisdom or dexterity is like the ones.
Yeah, and if you don't, I mean, my character in particular has 5 in my wisdom, so I've just always got a -3 to it. And not that I'm against ever doing a wisdom save, but like sometimes there are certain spells that just wouldn't be wisdom, or doesn't feel like they should be. So I think it's changed to intelligence instead, or whatever.
I've basically changed. I've gone through. I still need to finish it all actually, but I'm kind of doing it as we go.
Yeah, but anyway, like it's just nice. It's just a bit more balanced, I feel, because there's I think a lot of them were used all the time, and then basically I feel like you would never use a certain saving throw, but now like there's more opportunity where you would, and it's just. It just feels like it makes sense. It's just a nice small change.
Trying to balance them out. Intelligence saves don't get enough love. Strength saves don't get enough love, and charisma saves are very rare. So I've started to change them because wisdom seems to govern being frightened. Because obviously, like if you're less wise, you're more likely to kind of not have the willpower you'll flee. That makes sense. But being like charmed,
charisma.
It's not having the willpower. So again, it's wisdom, but there are a lot of ones that could be intelligence. Like there are some where your mind is being probed and they're trying to take over your mind. And I would argue that why can't that be intelligence? Sure, it makes sense that it's wisdom, but intelligence, there's like literally a handful of intelligence saves in the entire game. So for balancing sake, I've started to change some, and I'm like making a list of all the ones that I think should be swapped over, and essentially I'm keeping fear and things like that as wisdom, because I think that is more wisdom than intelligence. But things like madness I'm doing as intelligence, because I think it's about comprehending it. And maybe if you're thicker and more stupid, you see it and you're like, oh, I don't understand, and you lose your mind.
It's your ability to reason, I think.
Yeah. So that's a good one. Thanks, Josh. I totally forgot that we were doing that. There's a couple that we've had at the table for a really long time. One of which is when you long rest, you only heal half.
Yeah.
Which is just.
I'm sure most people do that.
I think a lot of people.
I might be
that.
wrong.
That's mainly.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You like have a massive fight. You've been like stabbed, been like shot with like loads of arrows, and then you just have a little sleep, and it's all gone.
It's all better.
I mean, equally, short rests don't make sense either, because you can roll a bunch of hit dice and go back up to full. But there are some things in the game that, like, you're a hero. We'll just forget about the fact your arm was half cut off, or that die will literally ripped your collarbone from its socket, or whatever it was. The other one that we do, that James you do now too, is doing the catch-up thing. So a catch-up pre-session we do, and I'm sure anyone who watches our show knows that we take it in turns to deliver a catch-up from the players. So the players kind of write a little paragraph or page or whatever summarizing either last session, and it used to be they would summarize the session, and it's strayed now basically into just a little monologue from that player, maybe about the thoughts of current things happening, maybe a letter to back home, maybe we had one, I think probably one of the best, although we've had some really cracking good ones from Ruthus. Ruthus actually broke everyone. Like I remember one session, it was one of the sessions where we came back, I think, in the middle of COVID, and we managed to have, like, last year in the middle, and Josh wrote a catch up where he was reading it, and we were so used to this inner monologue and Ruthus talking about the things that are going on and what he's thinking about currently, and all of the dire things in the world. And then he was like, and Ruthus turns to Dutch, and then you just addressed Mike in the middle of your catch up, and Mike, who plays Dutch, was like, what the fuck? And then went with it and spoke back and was like, you're right, Ruth, because you'd woken up in the morning and you were describing how you were around the campfire.
That was so fun. I knew it was going to be a shock, but I was like, oh, this is going to be great.
And people like, everyone was like, what the fuck? It was like fourth wall had been broken, but not fourth wall. And then Mike or Dutch was like, he was like, oh, morning, Rufus, or something. And then Josh just goes, Rufus turned and made his way further on and just left Mike behind and carried on. And you went round and you did a little thing with everyone, and it was so good. And I was just sitting there watching and loving it. And so it's developed into this, like, thing now. We had one from Richter after he died.
That was sick.
So he died at the end of the session, and then for the next session he did the catch up, and he wrote essentially his final monologue, and it was him, and it was like, it's cold, I'm lying here now, I can hear like, and it was describing the faint sounds of battle, and he was like kind of going, I hope they're okay. Like, I'm sure I'll see them in the next life, sort of thing. And we were all fully welling up. It was like really difficult to listen to. And then he got resurrected. Later on, I think an episode later, he finally came back after playing his sister for like a couple sessions. And that it's just so that listen to it. It's recorded. There you are. It's recorded in the streams. It's the best.
That's such an integral part of our game that I like forget that that's just a thing that we do. You know,
a total homebrew thing. Yeah. I recommend everyone does that.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones. I just can't remember. Maybe we'll save those for another time.
Yeah.
James, before we call it a day, where can the people find your stuff?
Where can they find your homebrew?
Going on? What have you got to offer? Oh, what's this, Josh? what is this?
What? Oh, I recognise that. That's a whole deck of cards made by a single man named Mr. James Gifford. A whole deck of how many cards?
I think
60.
60
he knows
homebrewed magical items for you at home to use in your own campaigns, enrich your stories and your characters, unleash their full potential.
I was counting it the other day because I've been making more cards on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Mr. James Gifford. And I have just over 120 homebrew items now since that.
So it's doubled.
Wow.
You heard it here first, folks. It's doubled. And that's something that so if you subscribe to your Patreon, they get access to it.
£1 a month, you can get access to 2 homebrew cards a week. There's other stuff, there's maps and things. I also have stuff on Instagram at Mr. James Gifford.
Oh my god, the maps look amazing. They're so cool.
The maps, James uses those maps for me as a player because I'm playing in James's campaign as a dwarven artificer. Morgrim oil brew for a pleasure to be at your service. We should have talked about Morgrim at some point, but he's homebrewed to an extent. His race, he's a dwarf. But his sub race is homebrewed. And you use all of
Mr.
those
James
maps
Gifford.
So good.
At Patreon or Instagram.
I think my favorite is those mines you did when we were in those mines. The maps are so good in those. Love it. The photite crystals glowing, and the kind of broken minecart tracks and things like that. All so cool.
I have a whole list of you've seen it, the list of homebrew minerals and rocks and magic
I use those. I use those
crystals and things. I'll put that on Patreon at some point.
I'm looking forward to this herbalist one, because the herbalist bundle, one of the cards in here, the herbalist bundle is I use all the time with my druid with Zook. You know, if he's ever rummaging through some garden or through someone's kind of some palace grounds, I'm like, roll a nature check or roll a survival check or whatever, and then I get him to roll on it, and it's always really great. But obviously if you're expanding that into a bunch of other stuff, it's gonna be
I'm doing it. It'll be a booklet of different herbs, flora and fungi according to environments, and it'll have a little section of how to do it in rules and herbalism, and it's designed to be something you can just have at the table as a player, almost like a little book of recipes kind of thing.
That's really cool.
I'll give it to you guys when it's the prototype, so you can
we'll definitely
play test it.
We'll play test all of the homebrew stuff, and
you better.
I'll take those diseases. Yes, please.
I'll give you all the diseases.
Ruthless is gonna get rabies straight away.
Cool. I look forward to it.
Well, thanks for joining us, James. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. It's been great fun.
Thanks. Can't wait to see Valentine in the campaign.
Yeah,
I
and
think
I was
we
about
might
to
be
say,
going to see him soon, actually.
who knows? Yeah, I reckon after this leg that they're currently doing in the capital city of Xanthar, it's likely that they could be heading Feywild way, but I think I have a feeling that you might also not, Josh. I think some of the other players have other things in mind, so we'll see. But whenever they head your way, Valentine will have to come back into the story. Definitely.
Yeah. Do I level up? What level are we?
You'll be the same level as everyone else when we get to that moment. What level is it?
You get to level down.
Level 14 at the moment, Josh?
Yeah, we are, yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm like level 9 or something, I think.
The last time Valentine played was you were there for a bit of the... You were there for the beginning of the battle for Ungmiri back in the day.
Yeah. With all those werewolves, I remember.
It was the werewolf invasion of Frank and his goons. You created some terraformed illusion bridge and yeah, I remember it. Oh, it's great.
I don't remember what happened. I remember I impersonated the captain of the guard or the captain of the town, and my deception was so high, but the way I behaved, because Valentine's just kind of aloof and like, hello, you take a day off work, and just kind of like everyone's like, wait, who is this person? Why is she acting so strange?
Valentine's popped up a few times as an NPC and had some time, so it'd be really it'd be just great to have you back in the world as well. It'd be really fun.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Cool. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thank you.
This Thursday we're gonna play, but we're not playing our normal sessions. We're unfortunately down a couple players, which means that we're just gonna play as a smaller group, and we're gonna play some Curse of Strahd. In fact, James, if you're around on Thursday, you're fully welcome to come and just play some Curse of Strahd.
I really want to. I'll see what my diary is.
See what you're doing. We've only played one session of it. We played it as like a kind of one shot while people were. Yeah, it's like our little in between thing. We haven't streamed it. We've just been playing it. So it's not going to be very thought out. It's not going to be like our normal streams, but we're going to stream it anyway. We're going to play some weird Curse of Strahd fun. It's going to be dark and I like one-shot sort of stuff on the side because I can be really brutal. They very nearly died in the last bit. Some clutch sanctuaries saved you, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you anon. Peace out from us.
Goodbye.
The Journeyman Questers and Mr. James Griffin.